Welcome to another episode. We've got a special episode with Todd, Tobias out on the West Coast. We're sheltering in place, and we're not going to talk about that too much. We're going to talk about the hobby we both love. So before I get to Todd, thank you sponsors, Topps Panini Upper Deck, as well as Heritage Auctions, Huggins & Scott Auctions, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, Burbank Sports Cards out in California, ComC in Seattle, and Beckett Media, including Beckett Grading and Beckett Authentication up the road. So Todd, you're San Diego. Welcome to the show. I'm delighted to hear your hobby journey from 1978 up to the present. So Take it away and welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I enjoy being here, and any opportunity to talk hobby is always fun. So my hobby story began in summer of 1978. We were taking a trip from San Diego up to visit family in Montana, and we were going to be driving in a motorhome. And so my dad bought my cousin and I both unopened boxes of 1978 Topps cards so that we would, go in the back of the motorhome and chew bubblegum and trade cards and just kind of have fun. And the truth is I was only 5 years old at the time. I didn't really know a whole lot yet about baseball or cards or anything along those lines. But something in that experience turned out to be magical, and I've collected ever since. Growing up, my dad actually was a very avid collector. He grew up in Denver at the time when the Denver Bears were the AAA farm club of the New York Yankees. And so he grew up seeing the Bill Scowrons and the Hank Bauers and the Johnny Blanchards and Tony Kubeks and all of those guys. And so a lot of my youth was spent talking cards and talking baseball history with my dad. And the one bit of advice that he always gave me was buy old stuff. So I was born in 1972, and so in the early 80s, all my buddies were collecting the Mike Schmidts and the Dale Murphys, and Darryl Strawberries were hot then, and Don Mattingly's, and of course in my area Tony Gwynn. We would go to the local card shows, and I'd be trying to find Mays or Aaron or Mantle or Aparicio, or he'd tell me about Nellie Fox, all these different guys, and so I certainly added in a lot of the stuff that was more contemporary to my age as well. But I really loved the old stuff and talking about it. And, conversations with my dad would be like, he'd talk to me about, for example, the 1954 Bowman Nellie Fox card. And he'd always say, I just don't understand why the ball was purple. And the ball in Nellie's glove, it's got a purple sheen to it. And just these funny little quips about cards that he remembered from being a kid was the kind of stuff that I grew up learning about.
What did you do for money? I mean, were you industrious, or did your dad give you some money, or was it a self-sustaining hobby at the point of time when you're looking for these Mays cards when your friends are buying the cheaper packs or looking for Don Mattingly? I mean, the cards weren't as expensive as they are now, certainly, but it still took money. So what was your source of funds?
Well, it depends on what era exactly you're talking about. By the time I was in high school, I hit high school at a really fortuitous time. I graduated in 1991. When card shops were like 7-Elevens, they were everywhere. And so the last 3 years of my time in high school, I was buying collections from kids after school. And then I could take them and wholesale them at card shops around town. So I made my money that way. When I was younger, you do whatever you can as a kid. You get an allowance for raking the leaves and mowing the lawn. My dad was an antique dealer by trade, so he kind of taught me the buying and selling thing when I was younger. So we would maybe go to a garage sale and I'd pick something up and he would help me to find a place to sell it. So we were kind of into the buying and selling, from very early on. At least that was what was instilled in me.
What are the first card shows that you remember? Were you in the LA area or in San Diego area?
No, in San Diego. The very first show that I can remember going to was at the Parkway Bowl it's in the basically La Mesa El Cajon border. And I remember I was probably 7 years old at that point. And I remember my dad bought 1960 Topps, Mickey Mantle, Louis Aparicio, and Nellie Fox, 3 cards for $10. And that was my first Mantle card that he gave me. But then we would go to the Scottish Rite Center shows that were in Mission Valley. Yeah. There were occasional shows at the Town and Country Hotel. Those were a little bit bigger ones.
Right.
So yeah.
What about getting up to LA? Were you pretty much a San Diego person, or did you get
I was a San Diego person. I never really got up to LA very much. I spent my summers in college up in Lake Tahoe, and so I would hit some shows around in Reno and areas like that, different casinos around the lake. But for the most part, I was San Diego.
Yeah, that's I went to San Diego a little bit. My sisters went to college there for
Okay.
a couple of years, but mainly I'd go to L.A. My parents used to live in Palos Verdes, and I'd visit them, and I'd hit the big L.A. shows from the kind of the mid '70s. I guess you were barely born, but
Mm-hmm.
And the first national there. Yeah, it was it seemed like a lot of action in Southern California.
You
And
know, as far as I could tell, it was kind of hard for me to judge because I wasn't really an adult at that point, just starting to be in the early 90s. But for a kid, there was plenty of stuff going around card wise. A bunch of my buddies collected. And then when they got out of collecting, they were more than willing to sell me their collections. And
so,
word got around high school, like I said, and I would buy collections from people that I didn't even know, kids that wanted money to take a girl out on the weekend or whatever, and they were willing to sell their cards.
well, but they were mainly newer cards, right? So I mean, they weren't.
For the most part, a lot of kid collections, they might come up with a random 50s or 60s card or a couple of cards in them somehow along the lines. But for the most part, they were mid to late 70s, early 80s kind of stuff.
And so where did you sell them in those days? I mean,
well, there were a ton of shops around town. So basically what I did, I took stuff home. I would give somebody a lump sum for their entire collection. I'd take stuff home, kind of sort it out, figure out a decent way to package it up to make it a little more attractive, and then I'd sell it to different card shops.
Okay. And then, one of the impressive things, Todd, you've shared with me is that you really never took an extended break from the industry. So did it just gradually escalate, or was there at some point where you got even more serious about it, or were you have to maintain the intensity? What was your track record there?
I don't know. It was just something that I was passionate about from a very early age. And I loved sports and I loved collecting. And so anytime that I got the opportunity in school, I would tailor some of my work around sports. And I always wanted to work somehow in sports. And that combined with having an interest in history, eventually I got to earn my college degree in history and a master's degree in history as well. So those things kind of dovetailed. But I collected the entire time, and my collection has changed size and changed focus, a few different times during the years. I would say from inception through about 1998 or so, I was 90% baseball, and I did cards and I did store model gloves and autograph balls and bats, and I had a couple of baseball themed pinball machines and really anything I could get my hands on. Later on, it shifted towards the AFL and things along those lines, Charger related, being in San Diego. And so I gradually sold off most of my baseball stuff and focused more on the football and the AFL. The thing that kind of drove that as well was the research and the writing that I've done professionally. I've written a couple of books on different periods in Charger history. I was the curator of the San Diego Hall of Champions Sports Museum here in town. And so I was constantly being fed sports and sports history. And, it was really, if you've got the collecting gene, when somebody is constantly pushing interesting stuff in front of you, it's really easy to start collecting it.
Has collecting been your main gig or your side gig?
Side gig for the most part, but my work has always been in sports or sports history. For example, like I said, I wrote a couple of books. I was the curator of the sports museum. I used to do a lot of history-based work for the Chargers. When they were here in town, I set up, home bar room or trophy rooms for a handful of baseball players. Trevor Hoffman, Brett Boone, Bob Boone, Jamie Moyer, bought and sold cards and memorabilia. So I've always been in and around sports cards, memorabilia, history, just in many different ways. So
you're mainly football now? And
for the most part,
and
yeah.
You have a list of I've talked on other episodes about the, I'm not that focused anymore. I had to be focused back in the day. I don't now. And so I enjoy just browsing and being opportunistic. But most people, it sounds like you are somewhat focused. When you go to a national convention, what are you looking for?
Well, I've got a list of very specific autographed football cards that I'm looking for. There would also be some different oddball AFL related cards that I would enjoy. They wouldn't necessarily have to be autographed. And then I still allow myself a little bit of leeway in terms of seeing stuff that I like or may not go in with a plan to purchase. I also happen to love the sport of lacrosse, and I collect lacrosse cards. So you don't typically find a lot of those, but on the rare chance that I do stumble across them, I'm willing to pick those up too if it's something I don't already have.
Do you get? Are you said you're a historian, but are you very analytical and numerical?
No, I would say I'm not a statistics guy. I'm more of a stories guy.
Well, my point is, like 64 tops football,
right,
compared to 63 tops football. I think there are a lot less 64 tops football. Generally, tops get more cards every year as you get close to the present. But if I look at 59, 60, 61, 2, 3 tops football, which are NFL sets, I think 64, 5, 6, and 7 are way lesser produced.
Lesser produced in terms of the size of the set, or in terms of quantity of the cards produced?
Cards produced.
Certainly.
Time, and so I think I think you've correctly seized on kind of a golden era. A pivotal era in the history of football, which essentially paved the way for the Super Bowl and opened up football. And San Diego was a big part of that.
Absolutely.
Part of that. But I want to do another episode with you that's just related to the AFL, because I think that'd be fun for the listeners, and they'd be just it's the AFC now, but it really was the AFL, and there really were some very distinctive differences. So I want to come back to that in a different episode. But how about you have a question for me? We just got time for one more question. Maybe you've got something burning to ask me. If you don't, I'll do something. But
it's funny because I was when I was growing up, I would get your price guides, the annual guides to begin with, and then certainly the monthlies, and you were like this oh my gosh, like this aura, this god in the hobby that as a little kid there was just such a large disconnect. It was something that I thought was so cool what you were doing. I guess if I were to ask a question of you, it would be, what's been the highlight of your collecting life? What is the thing out of all that you've done, both professionally and as a hobby, what have you enjoyed the most?
I think, I have some personal things, and then I have some group things. I think some of the personal things that I did in terms of collecting and doing some of the very first price guides, a real sense of accomplishment there. But a greater dimension of joy was, assembling a great team and really enjoying building up the company. And I don't miss being retired now, but because, if you're God, you don't retire, right? So,
absolutely.
Again, further disproof that I am not and never was anything but a mere mortal. But I am old enough to be your dad, Todd. So I'm going to take is that, and so that's a good note to end on. So thanks, Todd, for giving me a shot in the arm.
Hey, you bet. Thank you for having me.
We'll be back again with another episode tomorrow, and we'll be back with Todd at another time to talk about our mutual love of the AFL and how it's impacted football even today. So thanks, listeners. Thanks, Todd. Be back tomorrow.